Hi guys, welcome back to this week's podcast. As you can see, I've been left on my own today. So this week's podcast, I thought I would go through a couple of things which we talk about when we go out on our chiropractic community talks. And a lot of people don't really stop and consider that there's actually different types of healthcare systems out there. And it's really quite interesting when you break them down of how different we can utilize these systems. So did you know that according to the Bloomberg study in 2017, where they go around the different countries in the world and assess generally the quality of healthcare, anything through from alcohol rates, suicide rates, to feeding, exercise, through to mental health, accessibility to healthy foods. And it's really quite interesting that Italy ranks number one. And you would think when you look at their per capita investment as how much money they invest, I think it's around or just under the UK expenditure. When you then look at countries like the US, who spend the most amount of money on their healthcare system, they only rate down at 34. So why is that? Why is their health index in the US so low, whereas in Italy it's higher? And we can understand that Italy has the Mediterranean lifestyle, it has the Mediterranean diet, it has the outdoor, but are you also aware that in Italy they tend to also have a better community healthcare? What I mean by that is they have a better sense of the community looking out for each other. And that loneliness has always been regarded as one of the highest causes of poor health outcomes. Loneliness, not necessarily access to healthy food and water, it's loneliness. So it shows the sense of community and mental health, as well as the Mediterranean diet and the lifestyle and the high fish oils and everything we already know along those lines. So my question this week to you is, how is your healthcare system working for you? Have you ever actually stopped and thought about what healthcare system or systems are there out there for you to utilize, as well as also whose responsibility is this? Do we sit back and wait for the government to tell us what to eat and what to do and how to exercise, or do we invest in ourselves and go out and look at these things and become proactive? So we've got to kind of go back in healthcare and understand there's a timeline here. So the first timeline, really, if we go back to different stages in human history and looking at health, goes to the hunter-gatherer. Now, the hunter-gatherer, you've got to go back probably about 500,000 years, along the lines of kind of equatorial Africa. This was a time where it was very much food was feast or famine. Obviously, no refrigeration. You ate off the land, you ate what was available. The main cause of health issues and death and mortality rates in those days was trauma and infection. Pre-medication, pre-antibiotics particularly, and it's kind of a hazardous job living and staying alive and getting food. Stats suggest that there was about a 45% mortality rate by the age of 15. The mean age of decline of health was in the early 30s. And this is a time when there was no medications. Lifestyle was pretty much about survival, and it was a traditional live and what you can eat and feed. So people tend to think that the hunter-gatherer time was super fit, etc. And it probably was a time of people being super fit. But they were also, when they had feast, they never went out and exercised. They didn't go down to the equivalent of the gym. They lay around, they rested. It's a bit like the life of a lion in the wild. They had food, they rested, they conserved their energy. When there was famine, they nuts and seeds and foraged, or they had abundance when there was food available. So they gorged or they fasted. You then have to fast forward to about 10 BC, and probably around the time of the Egyptians, where you then started getting the concept of modern farming. This was really regarded in Egypt, the area called the Fertile Crescent. It's the area where we started to provide food in a farming sense. When it was along the lines of the flooding of the Nile. the major cause for health concerns, and that was infection. You had heat, you had moisture, you had the great abundance of food, but you had the no real traditional, as we know it, westernized medication. So there was the introduction of abundant foods, also introduction of grains and cereals coming into our diet, and meat on a little bit more of a predictable, regular basis. And you had the starting of husbandry or farming where we kept animals. Then we have to fast forward to the early 1800s, where we have more the influence that we understand today of industrialization. With industrialization, we started having in the 1800s an increased element of food processing, and this starts affecting our health. We have an increased production for the masses, so we've increased sugar, which in many early 1800s was a luxury, now becomes very much a more common commodity, as well as also flour. So we start having the influence of breads and sugars and sweet treats. We also have in the 1800s the concept of more women entering the workforce. So we have a change in health status of that, mainly because of breastfeeding. And we have the concept of women entering the workforce, so a change in infant care and infant health. We also then start finding in the 1800s the more modern day lifestyle chronic conditions that we know of today. We start having the heart disease, the obesity, the diabetes. These are things which weren't really picked up in the hunter-gatherer or even the early farming days, because there wasn't that abundance or influence of sugars and grains and flour. We're also interested in 1928, we have the introduction of penicillin. And that greatly changed the historical vulnerability of infection, and greatly changes our health status and predictability of health. And then after the Second World War particularly, we have a marked increase in industrialization, a marked increase in sugar, and the introduction of processed foods, for example, vegetable fats. And we start having the modern day concepts of the high fructose corn syrups, the sweeteners, and also in the 70s, 80s, probably more 80s, the introduction of Frankenstein foods, the margarines, the sweeteners. And these are really significantly changing our health status. So when we look at our health line, we can see why certain modern day health conditions are reflective of that timeline. And so in today's state, we tend to have two things to consider. In our healthcare, we have a sickness-based system and we have a wellness or a healthcare system. Now, the key of this is not to get confused with the word healthcare. Healthcare is the umbrella term. It's encompassing both forms. Healthcare is bounced around in that we tend to go, we've got private healthcare, we've got the government provides healthcare. Healthcare in today's form, what I'm referring to is that umbrella term of encompassing all care that is aimed at our health. See, because within healthcare you have two real systems. You have a sickness care system and a healthcare system. So a sickness care system is really aimed at relief of symptoms. It's aimed at, the body is giving us symptoms. These are unfavorable, these are uncomfortable, these are things which we generally, they are signs that we're not functioning well. So we take a medication, we take a remedy, we have a treatment, some form of intervention which causes or allows a relief of those symptoms. So on the other hand, we have a system which is about healthcare, which is to optimize our function, to help the body be at its best, to express life at its full potential. These are two very different concepts. And although the initial thought process is to think that they are opposites, they in fact both exist. They both need to exist. So symptom relief is a bit like saying, I'm banging my thumb with a hammer, my thumb is sore. The main focus of that is the pain in my thumb, so I need something, a remedy, an intervention, which will take the pain away from my thumb. If our focus is on the pain, then that system is very effective of dealing with that problem, being the pain. Another way of looking at, and that's a very much of a reductionist system, another way is looking at a vitalistic symptom or functional system is to say, why is that happening? So the hammer being is the problem. So whilst we control the pain in the thumb, we need to address the hammer so that the hammer doesn't hit the thumb, so we don't have the problem in the first place. The other way of looking at these healthcare systems, the sickness care healthcare system or wellness system, is like if you have a house and the house has a fire. The first person you would phone is the fire brigade. They're the ones who control the fire, they put out the fire, they use modern technology, high-tech equipment to control and extinguish the fire. Once the fire is out, the fire engine and the fire brigade leave. Their job is done. They've controlled the situation, they've put out the crisis. When you then look at your house, it's in tatters. It's burned, it's broken down, it's flooded with water, it's in ruin. The fire brigade's job is not to build that back up. What you then bring in, you bring in the repair workers, the designers, the restoration team, who then bring that house back to life, and maybe even the specialists who make that house better than it was in the first place, so it doesn't have the risk of catching fire, so it is actually healthier and more safe to live in. That's the wellness team. So these days there's a lot of confusion between sickness and wellness, and that we're tending to look for wellness from a sickness care system. So for example, if you have a headache, a tablet may be very effective to help you control the pain of the headache, but a tablet is not really addressing the underlying cause. The underlying cause may even be a normal stress response. So it's important to look at the stress and deal with other specialists whilst you control the symptoms. Do you get where we're getting at? And there is symptom relief, and then there's optimum health and optimum function. So when we look in how we approach that, we've really got to look at those two subsystems in the questions we ask. First question is what, and the other is why. So the what is what's going on. It's usually what most people go to a modern day medical practice to say, I'm having a headache, this is what can I help you with, what is the problem? And that's very important. But the other question is why. I think in our modern day healthcare system, we're not asking the question why. Functional medicine, vitalistic healthcare practitioners like a vitalistic chiropractic, nutritional therapists, there's a lot of modern day therapists who are working along in the modern day functional realm of also asking why. And I think we're not asking that question enough. Why would you be having the headache? Why do you think the body would do that? If you are having a health crisis, it's important to ask what is going on and how we can deal with that. But the other important question, even once we are comfortable and we're over the initial crisis, we must break it down and look at why. Why would the body, which is a self-regulating system which is designed for optimum function, it's not designed to let us down, why would the body be doing autoimmune issues? Why would it be doing irritable bowel? Why would it be doing headaches? It's very easy to rely on staying in the what and being comfortable, but very often that doesn't lead to long-term optimum health. It leads to chronic care, and it leads to chronic management of symptoms, which is fine for some, however, and sometimes is needed, but it's not really looking at the cause. So if we want to look at the cause and we want to have optimum function, we need to go back and understand our timeline of health. What are the modern day challenges as far as modern industrialized lifestyle? And we need to look back and start asking why. Why would the body do it, and why would why would it be in the body's best interest to give you that symptom in the first place? So these are concepts that Ollie and I work closely with. It's a concept which is very much the forefront of my chiropractic practice and the development of our practice along functional and functional health lines. So if there's any questions, anything along those lines, or we can be of service to you, please drop us a line, tag us, drop us an email, comment below, and we'd like to continue working with you and helping our community to ask not only what, but why. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Cheers.